Welcome back to Board to Life. Today we are doing our first of several overviews of enemies. So this will be the Primebloods overview, and I'm not going to go through anything with full rules still, but I will be going through all the various cards that have to do with, in this case, the Primebloods enemy race, as well as just the general statistics for each of them. Now, I will just do the quick little overview of counting how many of each thing there are. I will also show all of the player character models better in a moment because I didn't do that great in the characters video, so I'll do that now too. However, I'm just going to quickly go through how many of each type we have here. So we have one queen, we have 8 drones in 4 different poses, we have 36 adults in 6 different poses, and we have 6 larvae only in 1 pose. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go through these one by one, and we will also go through their cards and just how they work in general. So, let's do that, starting off with the larva. Okay, so I know we said we were going to be doing the larva first, but I actually want to go over one other thing before that. So we also have these eggs, which are just represented by tokens. If you have the terrain pack, I believe you'd also have a model for that. And these will go in a little slot at the top of the board that's represented by the nest, or is representing the nest. And some objectives require you to obtain these. All races have these in some form. It's still shown as an egg in all of them, but for example, if you're playing against something like Neo-Flesh Cult, it's probably more of like a little fleshy circuit thing, but it's still represented by an egg. So they're required for some objectives, or getting rid of them, or things like that. So that's the quick little description of it. Anyway, to what we were actually going to. I'm going to go through each of the enemies, starting with the larva. I have this little example board area for the sake of demonstrating things. And I also have a player board to the side here, which will be used if I need to demonstrate something there, which I will, because I'll be showing off cards and things like that too. So, let's, for example, say that I am in Life Support Control A. This is the contractor, by the way, if the camera wants to focus. There we go. That would be our example. And then we will take a larva for this first one. So, first of all, the larva token, and I will be doing the general enemy examples of this as well. So the larva token, whenever you draw a token out of the bag for an encounter of any type, which I will go through how that works in a moment, you take the token, it tells you what type of enemy it is, you flip it over, and in the case of larva, it's just going to be 1 on every token. Whereas when you get to some of the others, it will be multiple enemies, depending on the situation. So, in the case that we are in Life Control A, I'm just going to do the general example before we bring in the larva. What you would do is, let's say I want to go to the surgery room, which is already discovered. And I'm using that as an example because it's a little simpler for right now. So I would move over to the surgery room, and then I would have to make a noise roll. Now, what that means is I roll this 10-sided die here, and I like that in Retaliation this is yellow. It used to be black, and the reason it matters that it's yellow is because that matches the noise markers. So anyway, I would take this die, I would roll it. In this case, I got a 1. So I would look and I'd see if there's any corridor 1s. There's not. Now, let's say I rolled a 2. Now I'd have to place a noise marker in every corridor marked with a 2 next to me. So I'd take one and place one there, and I'd take one and place it there. Now, let's say it was a 3 for the example of only having 1 corridor with noise. And let's say that was already there. Now I move into the surgery room, I roll this, I roll a 3, let's say. Well, you can only have 1 noise in corridors in this situation. Any situation in the base game, you can only ever have 1 noise in a corridor. So if instead of placing another one, you remove that noise, and that went flying. We'll get that in a moment. But you would remove that noise, and you take the bag that has all of your tokens in it, In this case, I don't have all the tokens in there. So I reach into the bag and I pull out, in this case, for the example, a larva token. So I would flip this over, and being that the encounter was in this corridor, I will pull up the actual sheet that shows where encounters are and which ones they would be. But in this case, I would just place a larva in the corridor. Now, if I had instead rolled the danger symbol, which is a little like alien tentacle thing, I would still draw from the bag, but it would apply a different result, and I'll pull up that thing in a moment. And the enemy would end up right in my room. And if I hadn't done a move and secure, or basically having one of these in the room, that enemy would get to attack me right away. And with larva, that's quite bad. I mean, with any enemy, getting attacked is bad. However, larvae are especially bad because they don't just attack you normally, which is probably not the best example to start with, but we'll go for it. So, first of all, I'm going to pull up this table that I said. So, this is our encounter little queen help sheet. So, basically, in a corridor, in the case of larva, you're just placing a larva in the corridor. In a room, you are also just placing that larva in the room. If you draw it from the bag during bag development, which is a phase at the end of the round, which is going to be the case with all enemies, and that's just when we go through the development. I'll try to get to that. We'll see if I remember. You'll just add 2 drones to the bag. And then there's always going to be a blank token in each of these. It's always going to, and that blank token is always going to be adding 2 random adult variants of whatever alien you're playing with as the enemy to the bag. And then if the queen dies, you're going to get very similar results to the previous page. The only real difference is instead of having anything happen with the queen when you draw the queen token, it places drones and then removes the token permanently. So now that we got through that, let's go through what happens when an enemy attacks you in the case of larva. So the larva will hit you for, actually, sorry, before we do that, I want to go through one more thing as a little intro. So I'm going to just say, let's pretend this room doesn't exist right now. So in this case, we have the character in the room, and I see this empty corridor here, and I want to go over to whatever room is here. We know what the room's going to be, and I'm not necessarily going to follow exactly what the card says, but basically, we place our character here just to remind ourselves that that's the direction we're going, and if there was an enemy here, it would get to attack us. And then it would already be shuffled, so we draw a card from the exploration deck, in this case the Primeblood exploration deck, and when we do that, we're going to look at the card, and in this case it would be placing a room of the question mark type, which is just the generic rooms. It's not tied to a specific section. Now, in this case, I'm just going to place an A-type room, which is not necessarily what you do normally. However, that's what I'm going to do here for the example. And then you can see the type of room on the back, but essentially if you run out of A, or it's going to say either like question mark, or it's going to say an A, B, C room, and that's just going to correspond to what section of the map you're in. I think I've gone over sections before. If not, it is listed in the rules still. It's just more convenient to see this. And if you run out of the sections tiles, you switch to the question mark tiles anyway. So in this case, we'll just use this A tile for the example, and I will place it right there. And then in this case, we have 3 corridors. I only have 2 out right now, so I'm just going to place the 2 just for this demo. And let's say they go like this. So it would be in these spots that it shows. And what it would then do is, because there's this little noise icon right there, we take a noise token and we place it right there. And then it has a fun little reminder to place a secure token if you're moving cautiously. And in this case, it's going to tell you to resolve danger. Now, normally, you'd have to roll, it would tell you to roll noise or do something else and then roll noise. Now, in this case, it's just automatically making you roll that hazard symbol, which would cause you to draw one from the bag. I'm going to pull up a different card for it. That one also has it. I promise it's not that common for them to have that. Okay, yeah, this one, you do have to roll noise still, unless it says otherwise. So, in this case, you would close all doors around the room. And I'm not sure if I've gone over this before, but in this case, there would be no doors around the room. So doors are marked by this little, like, gray bar thing here. So there's a door option here, there's a door option there, but there's none over here because it has to be next to that room. It can't be on this side of the tile because enemies go through corridors now. So that, anyway, that's a thing. But continuing what we were saying with the larva, where did my larva go? It's over here. Okay. So the larva's in the room with you. Larva, whether they're in a corridor or a room, only have 1 health. So if you shoot or burst at it, so if it's in the corridor and I do a burst roll, with the exception of if your weapon has something for the 4 result, anything on this will kill that larva. It only has 1 health in a corridor, it's gone. In a room, the same is actually true. 1 damage still kills it. So, as long as you don't roll the ammo symbol on the die when you're rolling to shoot, it will die. And because they're so easy to kill, the only real threat of a larva is when they first appear in your room, if they immediately appear in your room, because normally if they're in a corridor, yes, they will eventually advance into your room, especially if you're rolling a lot of noise, but that gives you an opportunity to secure or shoot or burst into the corridor before they can do that. Anyway, once they're in the room with you, if they have the ability to attack you immediately, they will do so. Now, normally, when one of the intruders, and reminder if you forgot, intruder is an umbrella term for all of the types of aliens in the game, so I will likely continue to refer to them as intruders for the most part. These specific intruders are Primebloods, the standard race in Retaliation, but we have an attack deck, so normally, if it's not a larva are the only exception to this, you would draw a card from that deck and resolve its effect based on the enemy attacking you. With larva, you instead do something a little bit different. So with larva, when they attack you, you're doing 2 things actually. So I'm just going to scoot this off to the side for the moment. So the first thing you do, pretend there's a tile here to represent my character. There's not, but it's fine. So with the larva, it's basically going to jump into you and like infest you. So first of all, you're placing the larva on your board, which means you are immediately infected, which normally takes a little bit more than just existing. But in this case, that's all it is. And then you take a contamination card and you put it in your discard pile. So normally you'll have action cards there. And what that will do is it will sit in your discard pile and clog up your deck. So when you reshuffle your deck, this will be there. And you can only really get rid of this by using, well, permanently get rid of it by using cards that let you, such as medical items. Or you can discard it when you pass, which will just put it back here and it will go back into your deck. So it's basically clogging up your actions because you can't use this for any actions. The only thing you can use it for is to discard it when you pass. So you'll immediately have that happen, and then if you get another larva attacking you, you will gain another contamination, but you will not have another larva on your board. Once you have a larva on your board, that's all it does. So larva stop being very scary once you get hit by one, but until then, they're a real threat because you do not want to get hit by those. Okay. So, let's move on then. I will go into the next type of enemy after a quick transition. So, our next enemy type is the adult. So, we'll pull up this token, and this token is the adult token. So when you draw one of these out of the bag for an encounter, what will happen is you'll flip it over and you'll see a number. And that's, I dropped it, that's the number of intruders in the form of adults in this case that you would place in the corridor if it's a corridor encounter. So in this case, let's say the encounter was in corridor 3, I would take 2 adults, and we'll just get a close-up on these if I can. And they will be placed into this corridor. Now, in the case that it was a room encounter, you only ever place 1, and these enemies can end up, there's a maximum of 5 enemies, or actually it might be 6, I think it's 6 in a corridor, but generally with adults it's going to come in a group of 2 to 4 when they end up in a corridor. Now adults in a corridor only have 1 health each, so if I do a burst into that corridor for example, and I roll a 1, one of them will die. But if I roll anything other than a 1 in this case, since hits can be spread, in the case of a 2 or higher, I would be able to kill both of them, because it's a collective health of 2 between both of them, 1 each. So, if they're in the corridor, they're not much of a threat, unless it's a large group and you're surrounded by a lot of them, which can happen. Don't let that happen if you can help it, but it does happen. So let's say we end up with one in the room, whether it's because of the danger symbol or it moves in there or any other reason. Well, when they're in the room, it gets a little more tricky because unlike when they're in the corridors and unlike Larva, they actually have more health. Now, this system of health is very similar to the previous Nemesis games, with a little bit of an exception. So we're going to go through simple shooting rules now. Basically, when you fire your weapon, you're going to expend ammo, likely, depending on what it is. I'm not going to go too much into that part because it's not tied to the actual damage system. It's the ammo system. So when you shoot, you'll do a couple things. Step 1, you will deal a hit, which means you take one of these little red cube universal marker things and you place it next to the enemy. That enemy now has 1 damage on it. So rather than having a set health, in order to make it a little more unpredictable and add to that kind of horror effect of I'm shooting at it and it's not dying kind of thing, or it does die sometimes very quickly, you're placing that marker on it and it doesn't have a set health, you're not guaranteed to kill it. So what you do is you roll this die, the shoot die, the red one, and in this case I got a 3. So 3 is higher than 1, so it does nothing. You have to roll an equal or lower number to that. If you roll the ammo symbol, it consumes ammo because shooting doesn't normally consume ammo. And you don't kill it, but you do still deal that hit initially. So let's say I shoot it again. Well, now I place a second universal marker on it, and now anything that's 2 or less will kill it. In this case, I rolled a 4. So I would not kill it. And then I'm going to shoot it again. So I place a third universal marker on it. And I roll the die. And in this case, I get a 3. So now it would die. We'd remove it and the little markers. Now, let's say I was shooting it the first time. So I place a marker on it. And then let's say I roll this little cracked skull or critical hit icon. In that case, it would just die instantly, regardless of everything on it. And then, in the case of the out of ammo, it won't die, you'll lose ammo. That's the worst result you can get. Now, when this would move into your room, just like any other enemy, if the room's not secured, it's going to attack you. If the room is secured, you'll just remove that secure token instead. Now, unlike the larva, and like most enemies, so I'll only really go into this once, in depth at least, for this race. But you're going to take that attack deck, I have the actual deck here now, rather than just one card, and we're going to draw one. And we're going to see what it says. In this case, it's a bite card. So it shows the little icons for the tokens. In this case, they all do the same thing. So if it's an adult, in this case, it would instantly kill you if you're heavily injured. Why does the camera not want to focus? There we go. And if you're not heavily injured, you'll gain a serious wound and a contamination. So let's just quickly, and I do mean pretty quickly, go into how that works. So, in the case that I am at a healthy status here, if I were to just take like 2 points of damage, for example, I just lower this by 2. Really simple. But in this case, it said a heavy or serious wound and a contamination. So we went over contamination. That just goes in your... This is really crooked. This just goes in your discard pile. I know there's a really bad glare over there, but you know what card it is. And then that will clog up your deck. As to serious wounds, you take the serious wound deck and you draw a card. In this case, it's hand. So what these do is these go actually under your health bar here, and they have these little red X's on the card. And what that means is you can't have health there. So if your health is already there, it goes down to the next spot. If your health isn't up to that, or sorry, if you're trying to heal, you can't heal onto that unless you remove the card first. So you have to have a way to heal serious injuries in order to get your health back up. On top of that, they each have a damaging effect, and I feel like I went through this in the item video. Not entirely sure though. So the use item action in this case will cost you an additional action card. By the way, if you want that item video, it should be up here if I'm smart. I would have put a little pop-up there right now, maybe. We'll see. Anyway, So that's how that serious wound thing would work. Now I just want to pull out a card that's not the same for all enemy types real quick. So for example, Deadly Claws. In the case of an adult, it would just deal 2 damage and you'd gain a contamination. And then, camera. And then if it was a drone, it would instantly kill you if you're heavily injured. If you're injured, you gain a serious wound and otherwise gain 2 serious wounds. And then if it's the queen, you lose 2 health and gain a contamination. So just a little example of how those would work. I'll get this off to the side here. And then let's go ahead and bring back this example. So friendly reminder, or not so friendly reminder, I guess. If you move out of a room with an enemy because you don't think you can kill it, it does get to, before you move out, attack you, and then you just draw a card again. So altogether, you don't really want these enemies near you. Get them away, kill it with fire. Any method to eliminate the enemy is great. And now, moving on to the drones. Okay, so after that little close-up of the drone, I'll do another one here, but we have this one drone. They're essentially bigger adults for a size comparison. And with the drones, when you pull a drone token out of the bag, you're gonna see something interesting. So it says, if I can get it focus, a white number plus a red number. So that white number is actually a number of adults. So in the case that this is a corridor encounter, in this case it's 3 plus 1 was the value, you would take and you'd place 3 adults in the corridor, and then you place the 1 drone. And that's a pretty full corridor, especially since drones are a bit stronger. So, if it's a room encounter, you'll just place it in the room, as usual, by itself, because that's how room encounters work. So, drones are a little bit different from adults, though. So first of all, they have a tendency to have attack cards that are stronger. So when you draw an attack card, it tends to have a spot for a drone that does a little more damage or is a little more harmful or something like that. Sometimes a lot more. But when so we'll go through their health real quick. When they're in a room with you, their health is actually the same as a normal adult intruder. So same system of drawing cards and or not drawing cards, placing the markers, rolling the die, seeing if you can get equal to or lower, or a critical hit, and that will kill it. If it's in a corridor, rather than having 1 health, it will actually have 2 health. So twice the health in corridors. Meaning, if I have this little setup of these 3, and I roll a 2, I can either kill the drone, or I can kill 2 of these, or, because I should mention, if you only deal 1 damage to it, you're not placing a universal marker on here because health isn't stored when you're in a corridor. It will just do nothing if you have that overflow damage. So in the case that I roll a 3 here, I'm actually better off killing the drone and 1 adult than killing both adults and dealing a damage to the drone, because the drone will just be unaffected. Now if I get a 4, they would still all die. Anyway, back to having the drone in the room. As I said before, drones attack the same way as adults do, with the exception of generally having stronger attack cards. For example, if I can, there we go, no, not that one. Of course, I draw all the attack cards that don't do anything. Oh, there we go. So for this one, like drone and queen have a stronger ability here. I'll just let you read that card if you want to. But anyway, for the most part, that's just drones. And they're not something that you're going to see very often because they aren't starting in the bag. They only appear in the bag when the bag development causes a larva token to be drawn. So sometimes you don't get any, sometimes you get a lot. And then we will move on to what you've probably all been waiting for, the queen. Okay, so after that close-up-ish of the queen, we'll go into, first of all, the queen tokens. You have that picture, and then if you flip it over to the back, you're just going to see another picture of the queen, because the queen appears on her own. So this is the queen, and for a little scale comparison, this is an adult, And then, of course, our player is quite a bit smaller. Now, I will mention, because I think if you haven't noticed already, that in Retaliation, as to games such as the original Nemesis and then Lockdown, the rooms have gotten a little bit bigger, and the enemies have actually gotten smaller. And that's just because we have swarms of them. And you wouldn't be able to fit swarms of the original sized enemies in this. And it just allows us to have those swarms without really raising the price of the game. So anyway, if we have a corridor encounter with the queen appears in the corridor, as you might expect. If we have a room encounter with the queen appears in the room, once again, as you might expect. So, the thing that makes the queen a little bit different, other than generally having stronger attacks, is that her health does not work the same. So, with normal enemies, you have either 1 health in the case of Larva, or in the case of things like drones and adults, you have greater amounts of health that are stored based on those little cubes. Well, the queen has a whole other system, partially because she has really high health and is really hard to kill. But she uses cards, actually. So you have this set of queen health cards, and these are all going to be placed on the little slot above the board. So at the beginning of the game, you shuffle these up, and there's a health track for the queen. And that health track has 5 spots, because it's assumed that you're not going to really take more than that, and if you do, it kills her instantly anyway. So what happens is you do a normal process of shooting her. I know I said it's different, and you'll see why in a moment. So you'd place the cube, you'd roll the die, you'd place the cube. In this case, again, because I'd be shooting again, I'd run out of ammo. I'd shoot it again, deal a 3rd damage. Rolling really bad right now. I'd shoot it again, do a 4th damage, and in this case I roll a 3. Well, the queen doesn't die so easily. So you reset the health track, and just to be clear, you're not actually going to be placing the cubes here. There's a cube placed on a health track on top of the board, and that cube will track her health. And then when you reach that skull, either by rolling that number less, rolling a critical hit, or just dealing enough hits that you eventually reach that icon, you'll take, and you will take this queen deck, you'll reveal the top card of it, and there'll be a number, which will be discard that many additional cards, and then an effect. So in this case, it's repel the queen, which would push her back into a chosen corridor. Or if she's already in a corridor, because you can burst at the queen, and it will deal that many hits and move that far along the track, she would move into the farther room, essentially. But in this case, it says discard 2 additional cards. So I would discard that card, and then I would also just discard the following 2. Now, if I manage to deal enough damage to her again, we reveal the next card. This one adds all the queen tokens to the bag, which is dangerous, because once the queen's out, if a queen token's drawn, it's going to activate her, and she's going to move, and that's not good. And then in this case, it would be discard 1 additional card. We do it again. This one would do, make people do noise rolls, but it would also discard 2 more. And we keep repeating this process, essentially, until there's no more cards. Which, yes, that can take quite a few times of killing the queen. Or not killing her, but like reducing her to no health. So, once you've done that finally, the queen will die. And that can be very useful for some objectives. Or just not having to deal with the queen, since the queen is kind of a menace. For example, let's try this again. There we go. Tail attack. So normally, if any normal enemy did this, it would just deal damage and contamination, which, I mean, it's not great, but it's not horrible. And then if you are injured or heavily injured, you just die if it's the queen. And otherwise, you're taking a serious wound and a contamination, which is a lot worse. Also, the queen generally moves and attacks a lot more because drawing the tokens from the bag can actually have other effects, like activating her again if she's already out. Now, I'm going to once again just go through our little queen help sheet here, because I want to just go through bag development steps. So one of the steps at the end of the round is you're going to go ahead and you're going to activate the queen if you draw the queen token. If you draw the drone or the adult, you're adding 2 queen tokens to the bag, making it more likely for the queen to come out. And if you draw larva, you're adding 2 random drone tokens to the bag. Of course, in any situation, if you draw the blank, you're adding 2 adults to the bag. And then if the queen So I'll go through the activate the queen thing. So if you're in a corridor or a room, you're going to get to activate the, I shouldn't say get to, you don't really want it to happen, but you're going to have to activate the queen if you draw it from the bag. And if she's not there, you'd place her there. So that's all the actual enemy types. Now I want to go through their attacks and event cards for those two. And this is the part where there might be a little bit more of spoiler stuff if you want to avoid that, but it's not exactly a story game. It is like dramatic, but it's not like a storyline that has actual spoilers. It's more if you don't want to be surprised by the events, don't watch the next part. Anyway, let's do it. A little honorable mention of exploration cards because they are tied to the specific enemy race you're fighting. However, they're not particularly interesting to read, so I will just do a little one of these. It's mostly just the layout that the room will look like and any added tokens. So not too interesting to go through. But let's begin with the attack deck. I've gone ahead and I've separated these because there are repeats in this deck by type. So there will be 2 of the first card, tail attack. So if it's an adult or a drone, you lose 1 health and gain a contamination. And if it's the queen, you will die if you're injured or heavily injured and otherwise gain a serious wound and contamination. 2 of that card. Fury. I'm going through these as quickly as I can while still reading through them. I know I could just not read through them, but I'm going to. So lose 2 health, gain a contamination if it's an adult. If it's a drone or a queen, all heavily injured characters in your room die. Yes, it can kill multiple characters at once. And every other character in the room will gain a serious wound and a contamination. 2 of that card. In the case of an adult with blood sense, you will take 2 damage. In the case of a drone or a queen, you will take 2 damage, and if you are moving, you place the attacking enemy in your room where the movement ends. So essentially, to make that a little bit clearer, basically, if you're trying to run away from it, and this is an opportunity attack because of that, it will follow you. There's only 1 of that card, though. Deadly Claws. Lose 2 health and gain a contamination if it's an adult. If it's a drone and you're heavily injured, you will die. If you are injured, you gain a serious wound, and otherwise gain 2 serious wounds. If it's the queen, you will lose 2 health and gain a contamination. There are 3 of that card. And then we have Infecting, so if it's an adult or a drone, you will lose 2 health. If it's the queen, you gain a contamination, and if you are not infected, you become infected. There's only 1 of that one. And then Bite, which I know there's quite a few of, is going to be the same for all of them, and if you are heavily injured, you die, otherwise you gain a serious wound and a contamination. There are 3, 4, 5, 6 of those. And then, everyone's favorite attack card, Miss. Nothing happens, and then you reshuffle the deck. There's only 1 of that one, for obvious reasons. It's not an easy game. Scratch. Gain a contamination for any of those situations, and there's 4 of that card. So, we shall then move on to the event deck, which is where you can see how bad things can get. That was camera bump number 2, I believe. So first we have reactor overheating. So this first section is just going to be enemies moving. I'm not going to go through that for every card. You can read it if you want. So basically if the cooling system is malfunctioning or the reactor room is malfunctioning, you activate the auto destruction procedure. If not, then you break both of them. So that's interesting. Basically, if neither of them are broken, it's just going to break them. Okay. Otherwise, it's going to make sure they're broken. Scent of Prey. We resolve... Oh, and also this one reshuffles the event deck. You're going to see a lot of reshuffle the event deck or remove this card from the game with these events. So, Scent of Prey will resolve noise in each adjacent corridor to a player, and then each player makes a noise roll. Now, I do want to go through what that means. So, a corridor adjacent to a player, first of all, would just be any of these in this case because there's a player here. So these 4 corridors. Now, resolve a noise is not the same as placing a noise. So basically, placing a noise marker in those corridors would place them in the corridors. Resolving a noise in the corridors would be if there's already a noise marker there, you're replacing it with the enemies from whatever encounter you draw out of the bag. So there's just a little clarification on Scent of Prey. And then it also makes each player make a noise roll afterwards. Now, we have the Queen Awakens. So, if the Queen is alive, we're adding all the Queen tokens to the bag. And then we're placing a noise in each unexplored corridor without a noise. Quick explanation again. Unexplored corridors are corridors that lead off into nothingness, also known as there's not a room there yet because you haven't been there, hence unexplored. Okay, camera bump number 3 that I'm aware of. Then we have no way out. So you'll place 4 adults in each non-reinforced corridor adjacent to the landing zone, and then each player makes a noise roll. Yes, I'm going to keep going back and explaining what these words mean. So, non-reinforced? Yeah, so non-reinforced corridors are just corridors normally. Of course, there's no landing zone here, but let's pretend there is. A reinforced corridor is when you have the corridor, you flip it over, and now it's a 0 noise, which doesn't happen very often in my games, but that's mainly just because everyone's in a hurry and trying to just get out of there alive. So, and then this is also going to make the players make a noise roll. Then we have leaving the shell, which I just want to point out no enemies move with this one. But each player that's infected with a larva will gain a contamination, discard all their actions, reshuffle their deck, and resolve the eclosion procedure. So that can be found at the end of the rulebook. It's essentially the procedure that can instant kill you. And I believe it is still a thing in Retaliation, but if you die from that, it replaces you with a drone. And then that drone can attack people. Because it hatches. And then players that don't have a larva will draw 4 cards and resolve the infection procedure, which is essentially scanning those 4 cards and checking if any of them are infected, if they're contaminations. And if they are infected, they will become infected, hence placing a larva on their board. Okay, breaking in. So discard a secure token from each room, and then resolve a noise in each unexplored corridor. Short circuit. In sections with power, which we should know are life support, place a fire in each room with a malfunction marker, and then each player in a room without a secure token will resolve danger, or hazard, or whatever that symbol's called. Then we have panic. Each character in a room with an intruder or adjacent to a corridor with an intruder will lose an oxygen or spend ammo, and then resolve a noise in each unexplored corridor. Hatching. So, place a larva in the nest. It immediately attacks if any players are there. Place the larva in each unexplored corridor adjacent to a player, which is a lot of larva very quickly. In some cases, you don't actually have that much larva. Anyway, resolve a noise in each unexplored corridor. If you don't have it, do it by player order, or corridor order. I'm not actually sure which in this case. Protect and serve. Place 2 drones in the room/corridor with the queen. They do not attack. If there is no queen on the map, add 2 random drone tokens to the bag. Each player in a room without a secure token resolves hazard or danger. Life support failure. Flip all life support to off. Place a malfunction marker in each life support control room, and then place a noise in each unexplored corridor without a noise. Generators overheat. In sections with life support, you'll place a fire marker in each life support control room. In sections without power, you'll place a malfunction marker in each life support control room. And then each player will make a noise roll. Damage. So you will place a malfunction marker in each room with an intruder, and then each character in a room without a secured marker resolves hazard or danger. Rise to the machine, which is a fun one. Well, sort of. Place a malfunction marker on the robot. Place a malfunction marker in the room with the robot. Each player in that room loses 2 health. Basically, the robot's shooting you and breaking itself. And then we will place a noise in each unexplored corridor without a noise. System failure. Place a malfunction marker in each computer room. Resolve a noise in each unexplored corridor. Egg protection. Place 2 drones in the nest. They immediately attack if any character is there. Place 1 drone in each unexplored corridor in section C, and then each player makes a noise roll. Overwhelming enemies. Place 1 drone in each corridor with a noise adjacent to a player. Each player in a room without a secure token resolves danger. Now I want to point out with this one, placing a drone in each corridor with a noise adjacent to a player will remove the noise because in this race, or just generally in Retaliation is an exception, but generally you aren't allowed to have noise in corridors with enemies, so if an enemy moves into a corridor with noise, it will actually remove the noise. And then the landing zone explodes. Place a fire marker and a malfunction marker in the landing zone. place a noise marker in each unexplored corridor without a noise marker. Fire breath. In each room with a fire marker, spread fire to all neighboring rooms and sections with life support. And then each player makes a noise roll. Now, quick little mention with this. That means, assuming this section has life support, if there's a fire marker right here, which would be dealing damage to me. Oh, and also, fire does deal damage to enemies. There's a step for that in the event phase. But spread fire through adjacent corridors, basically any connected explored room that's still in that same section with life support, or I guess in a section with life support, so as long as it's not going into a section without it, we will spread fire, meaning that we just place a fire marker in each of those. Okay. And then I believe we just have one or two more, just one more, which is damaging fire. So I'll place a malfunction marker in a room with fire. In each room with fire, spread fire through corridors with the lowest noise value. And then each player in a room without a secure token resolves danger. So, as you may have noticed, there are reasons even in the event deck to go ahead and use those secure markers. Well, hopefully that was helpful. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Board to Life.